Peter Cowman's The Shelter Maker's Manual, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which are currently 20% off until the end of March here at Sheila Nigay Bookshop and on walnutbooks.com. So, Peter has previously published the Be Your Own Architect course, which I personally used when I was trying to design a house and found it very good. So I think that they're good and useful books, and I'm very happy to have them here. Peter is currently on tour of Ireland. It's all on sheltermaker.com. If you want to go to an event other than the ones here in Cloughjordan, which are this wonderful book launch. And tomorrow there is a course called Eco Building on a Shoestring. And there are a few places left, so if at the end of the evening you decide you want to learn more about environmentally friendly low-cost building, there are some places, and it's starting at 9:30 in the morning, a few doors up at the Eco Village office. So I am going to shut up now and just hand over to Peter Cowman.
My good friend Jerry Green
great
is going
pleasure
to
to
do the
launch
launch, and then I'll
this
say
manual. Two parts here.
I commend Peter for his tenacity and vision in making this information available to all in spirit of the ancient and venerable vernacular architecture tradition with its strong commitment to information and knowledge sharing. The Shelter Maker's Manual is a wonderful book, and I highly recommend it to everyone. Congratulations, Peter. It's an outstanding achievement, an absolutely outstanding achievement in your work. And many congratulations to you.
Thank you very much.
I thought I might get away this evening without saying anything, because I've been doing a lot of talking the last 2 weeks, but I'd like to ask my friend John Long to say a few words. John Long was an early adapter to the whole, well, it wasn't even called living architecture, and it wasn't even called shelter making. When volume 1 of the handbook came out in '92, John famously said, "I didn't know what I was looking for, but I think I found it now." And he proceeded to do everything that was in volume 1, and then rang me up and said, "I've done everything in volume 1, where's volume 2? And I said, "Well, volume 2 is in my head." And we began to work together, and that process actually gave birth to the whole notion of living architecture. So I'd just like to ask John to say a few words.
Thanks, Peter. I'm delighted to be here. My name is John Long, I'm from Cork, and I'm delighted to be here this evening to help Peter suit all our needs when our family got bigger. But most importantly, what happened is that because we had put all our ideas and our effort and our love into this project, for some strange reason, the house grew with us. And as things changed and our circumstances changed, the house changed. It seemed to just evolve. We went from rooms, changed functions, they changed shape. Everything's to go right was we changed from workshops to studies to bedrooms. My wife even opened up a preschool in one of the rooms that for some reason, if you had designed the house specifically for it, you couldn't have done it better. Everything seemed to just evolve for us, and it has been going on ever since. And I always remember one thing, you go back to when just before we were building the house, and we were sitting on the foundations one day, just having been poured, and I said to Peter, "Will I ever finish this house?" And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "John, if you finish a house, you've built the wrong house." And so ever since then, the house is still changing, still building, and still going on. But the most important thing about that journey, since we met Peter 20 years ago, is that in all that time, Peter has remained one of our most dearest and most generous friends and closest friends ever since. And Peter, thank you for everything you've done for us all my life.
Yeah, so it's great to be here, Jordan. And thank you very much to Liz. When I sent out the idea of the Shelter Maker Tour, Liz picked up on it straight away in Australia and offered to do a book launch. I was delighted because all this was happening. It's like being turned on your head and seeing everything, different. The sun yeah, it rises in the east, but it moves to the north and then it sets in the west, as opposed to here where it rises in the east and it goes to the south, and you're looking at the moon in a completely different way. So all of those things have really allowed me to see the familiar things in a different sort of way. But I think more than anything what's happened is looking at the traditional Aboriginal culture in Australia, which of course has suffered terribly with the colonisation, and a lot of parallels with what happened really in Ireland, but they have such a strong sense of what they call the dreaming, and the Aboriginal people, and of course they don't have a built tradition of the dreaming. Is so powerful in their communities, and of course the community is such a strong thing in the Aboriginal tradition. And the dreaming consists of each person having their own dreaming, which will be part of a larger dreaming. So when they have their corroborees and they get together, you tell your part of the story, and of course everybody gets to hear then the whole story, but you only ever hold a part of the story, and it's all rooted in what I would call the invisible realms, things we can't see, intangibles. And this has been very inspiring to me, and even though I've been working since 1989 on these ideas of people being their own architects, it's really going to Australia has allowed the sort of natural completion of that, and the development of the whole idea of the shelter maker, which is keyed into the whole be your own architect concept, that we have that natural ability, that house design was never part of the architectural profession, that it was always a community-based oral tradition, very much like the Aboriginal tradition, and that really what's happened is that once people stopped making their own houses, that the knowledge of how to do it was forgotten, that it wasn't handed down because it was an oral tradition, there weren't any drawings and so on. So you learned by being involved in the construction process, and you keyed into then the whole cultural domain of that, and that one can understand how people relinquished that world of shelter making and food production in favour of the promise of the machine age, that, you know, it's still being embraced as a promise, but we have to look at what has resulted from that. And what has resulted from that is, we're severely disconnected from the natural world, and we're in fact destroying the natural world. So where the impulse to create shelter grows out of our desire to remain alive, that's what the shelter making impulse is. It's to continue being alive and to reproduce. That it's ironical that so much shelter making is so destructive to the planet, and that people are caught in that really paradox, and yet to my mind we need to be reconnecting with the shelter making imperative. It still resides in our genes. It's quite easy. How could that possibly be? I studied architecture for 5 years. I was working as an architect, granted not for very long. I found it boring, but I had had the education, I had the degree. How come I didn't know how to design a house? Because I'd never been taught how to design a house, because it never was part of the architectural profession. It was always part of another tradition called the vernacular tradition. So as one looks for books on the subject, there isn't one. Yeah, there are books on different aspects of building, particularly with a focus on the material aspects of it. Okay, there's a book on cob houses, there's a book on straw bale houses, here's a book on concrete houses, but nothing about how buildings affect us emotionally. So this invisible part of buildings is completely neglected. The focus is always on the physical aspects, the material aspects of it, and we see that then reflected in the wider world, that there's such an emphasis on the material aspects of life, that the emotional aspects of life are completely neglected, that the potentiality of the buildings to allow people to get in touch with their deeper selves is simply not there. When we look at the older traditions then, for example, the Vastu Shastra tradition from India, which is the oldest architectural tradition, or the Feng Shui, which is the Chinese tradition that grew out of the Vastu Shastra, what we find is this emphasis on the life energy that the building can channel into people. So the choosing of a site carefully, your birth date, your innate nature, all of these things get put into the house design mix, and the building is very, very carefully sited and laid out. And the purpose then of that building is that it will channel life energy into you so that you can live your life. And this is the tradition I find myself working in. It's a very old tradition. It's something we all recognize in our deeper inner selves, and it's an awful lot of fun. And my own experience of living my architecture is that it's so empowering and it's so exciting, and particularly if one avoids a mortgage, which I've been doing since I was a very young man, quite successfully, and all the dire predictions that I was told about, none of them came true. In fact, the opposite. I've had a very fulfilling life, a very exciting life, and the living of my architecture has allowed me such immense freedom in terms of exploring my inner self and my development as an individual that I recommend it to everybody. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you all.